Hi, everybody. Welcome to the PC Perspective Podcast. This is episode 166 for August 17th, 2011. I'm Ryan Shrout.
I'm Jeremy Hellstrom.
I'm Josh Walrath.
I'm Al Malventano.
And you can see we are recording a very special episode of the PC Perspective Podcast. I am sitting in a very special chair at a very special location at the Twit Brick House for the first time. This is very cool for us. It's kind of weird to be surrounded by all of your ginormous heads. I guess they're about normal size, not when you do that, but they're pretty close. So if you never watched the video version of the podcast, you definitely want to check this one out. It's a really cool studio, really cool panoramas of everything. If you want to see all of us for whatever reason, you can definitely do that. So we had a lot to talk about this week. We're going to jump right into it. I think it's important that we start with where we left off last week. I think I teased the John Carmack interview, but we didn't actually have it up or online or anything like that yet. So we do have it on there now. If you've never heard John Carmack talk, you definitely want to go watch the video version of this interview. It is one of the most dense discussions you'll ever hear, which is not a negative, I think, in this case. It's not like listening to your professor at college kind of drone on and on, right? This is, I would put this kind of on level with like reading a book from Stephen Hawking. Is that a fair comparison, Josh? Is this, he says a lot and there's no lost words there. It's all very important what he has to say.
Yeah, he doesn't ever say or or yeah, or like, unless of course he actually is using a simile. But no, the stuff is dense. He knows what he's talking about and he likes to talk about it.
All right, well, let's, some of the topics that we got to cover in this interview started with unlimited detail, Euclidean engine, and that was kind of all the rage during that week of discussion, right? Is this possible? Is it something people want? Is it feasible on current hardware? And he really kind of talked about it and was saying things like, it might be feasible, but the generation, the procedural generation of data is nothing but really crappy data compression, which I also thought was another really, really interesting quote, right? So if you think of tessellation, you think of these kind of infinite detail engines where one of the ways they try to get that much data is to develop it procedurally, so it kind of happens in real time. You're not, you don't have to have 3 terabytes worth of stuff on your hard drive. You just have to know how to access it and create it on the fly. Well, he was saying, if without artists to really kind of paint the brush strokes, paint the broad strokes of something at the very least, then you're going to end up with uninspired content, which, if you look at that Euclidean demo, I don't know, have you guys all seen it?
I just posted a link to it on the chat there.
Okay. If you look at the demo, they say over and over in the video that they're technology guys, that they're not artists. So, but it doesn't look very good. It's impressive, this scale, how far they can scale out and how close they can scale in, but it's not impressive. There's square edges on everything. It's not rounded. It doesn't seem to use any kind of artistic vision or anything. But
we're not going to make mention of that later on at all, are we?
No, not at all. What else did we talk about? Oh, so I asked about the GPU race. I said, he's mentioned previously that Intel and AMD CPUs doesn't really matter at this point. They all do the same thing for him. He doesn't worry about programming or developing for one or the other. I asked him if that was the same for GPUs, and he said, somewhat interestingly, he doesn't care about the GPU hardware at all. What he cares about is the drivers. And this kind of gets down to his big pet peeve that I guess has developed since he started working on the console ports of, well, not ports, but the console versions of Rage and that kind of stuff, is that with a console, you get very close to the metal access to the hardware. So what was the thing he was talking about, Josh, in terms of you just changing a texture, floating point value type of thing, would take tens of thousands of times longer on a PC individually than it would on a console.
Yeah, because all they're doing is writing to a certain memory address if they're going to update the texture on that pixel, and they just kind of program that in there, and it just does it on the consoles. They're close to the metal. They have really granular control over where things are written in memory and memory control. Right. And when they're doing it on the PC, you gotta go through OpenGL or DirectX. It's kind of a hot dog down a hallway when you think about it. And that's why they do all of these massive texture grabs at once, because the latency is so terrible. But they just bring them all in, and go from there. And the consoles, because they're only got 512 megs of shared space. So essentially, on like the PS3, you've got 256 megs of texture memory. You got to do a lot more there. On the Xbox, you've got still that 10 megs of EDRAM that does frame buffer, but you have kind of more shared memory that they dynamically do. But on here's a massive PC. It's got 2 gigs of memory on the video card and 8 gigs of memory in main memory. And instead of being 10 to 100 times faster, it's only like 3 or 4 times faster because of this API overhead that's just eating everybody's lunch.
He said specifically, is like, look, a PC, the horsepower on a PC today is literally an order of magnitude faster than anything that consoles can muster up, but you lose most of that to the software overhead, which is interesting. And it's one of the things I think I'm going to kind of pose some questions to both Nvidia and AMD on this front and see what are the advances you guys are planning in that regard. Does Microsoft have anything planned? Does OpenCL hurt this or help it? I'm guessing hurt. So that was an interesting part of the discussion. There's definitely a lot more there in that. In terms of Intel graphics, he mentioned very specific.
But do I want to bump in here real quick?
Yeah.
If you remember last year, AMD came out and said, okay, we've got this OpenCL driver that leverages both the GPUs and the CPUs. Mm-hmm. And now we've also got them really pushing this this kind of shared address space that they're all going to use the x86-64 address space for the CPU and GPU. Well, with an OpenCL type application, I think in that kind of instance, it's going to become better because you're going to have more a CPU type control over memory access, memory addresses, and the address space. Okay. When they finally get those two things together. And so, it's probably not going to make it worse. I mean, right now it's just as bad as it ever was. But once AMD goes to that, and hopefully if we see Nvidia and Intel start embracing that as well, then we're going to see a whole lot better manipulation of memory addresses due to
in that same vein, he talked about Intel integrated graphics, how much it's improved. He even went as far to say that it was almost on feature parity with currently existing chipsets. Now, that's something I think all of us would disagree with, that it's not on feature parity, that there are still definite reasons and things you can't do on integrated Intel graphics that you can do on NVIDIA and AMD, even very, very budget graphics or on AMD's Llano APUs. But I guess from his developer point of view, his developer standpoint, that's what he's looking at is here's this mass market, and it's almost feature parity. It's DX10 capable, the Knox DX11 capable, and he said it's going to be a very big surprise for the industry. It's going to be a big wake-up when all of a sudden your integrated graphics that you get with either Intel, Sandy Bridge, Ivy Bridge, etc., gets to the level where you can play everything you want on it. And he seems to think we're pretty close to that. And in that same line with what you were talking about, Josh, he thinks that move, integrating CPU and GPU on the same die on one processor, is kind of like the inevitable conclusion to everything, which is obviously something AMD believes as well. But I think AMD's way ahead of what Intel's doing in that regards, right? So you wrote a lot about the Fusion, the Fusion system architecture and their goals for that unified memory address space. And those types of things would basically fix or have the potential to fix what his complaints were about developing on the PC now, and that it would kind of create a console PC type of development unity there, which is kind of interesting to think about.
Yeah, I mean, and with Intel, the thing that he really likes about it is that it does things like it shares last level cache. It's got a little bit more efficient system interconnect than what AMD has. AMD has essentially, put the GPU on the same CPU die, but it's got all these memory crossbars that allows it to talk to main memory and then also communicate with the CPU, but they don't share caches. They don't share address spaces. And there's a couple other things that AMD does not do. I mean, it's their first generation of this.
It's still their first generation.
And Intel has been pushing this a little bit farther in terms of actual integration rather than GPU performance. I mean, AMD's got GPU performance out the yin-yang.
Sure.
And, for an on-die GPU. But what they don't have yet is really that tightly knit GPU, CPU that Intel employs, and we're going to see greater integration in future Intel CPUs, and I think that's what John is hinting at, and that it's going to come up and kind of bite AMD if they don't really get going on this. And I think, it's one of the areas that AMD is really pushing with this APU and the shared space and just getting them closer and tighter together. And hopefully we're going to see a little bit more of that on Trinity next year, but it's going to look very much.
It's going to be very similar, I think.
It's going to be similar to the current Llano APUs. But I think the generation after that, when they're really kind of getting them pretty tight together, that's when we'll see some interesting stuff. But I think we're going to see a little bit more interesting stuff from Intel sooner. But then again, I mean, this Ivy Bridge is going to be that TikTok, so it's going to be essentially a shrink with some bug fixes. Well, not bug fixes, but optimizations.
Right. Small enhancements.
Sandy Bridge. So it's going to be interesting to see where Intel goes, because I think that they did see the writing on the wall and saw that, we went with this Larrabee thing.
That didn't work out.
Yeah, it didn't work out. We're actually paying attention to GPUs on the CPU. We see how the software world is starting to embrace this massively parallel architecture, and how even though we've developed these massively parallel architectures with x86, it's just not as efficient because of the way x86 works,
right?
And how you have to have all this whole network of interconnected nodes. And I think that they're starting to drink a little bit of the GPU Kool-Aid,
right?
And they're going to be
choice.
No, they don't, and they're going to be a force to be reckoned with. They're hiring a lot of people, and they're an aggressive company.
So there was a lot more in this interview. I mean, like I said, it's only 35 minutes, but you listen to us for an hour, you don't get nearly as much information as you would at listening to John Carmack for 5 minutes. But some other key points. He talks about ray tracing. He thinks that ray tracing will inevitably win the rendering war. We kind of had this debate a couple years ago, rasterization versus ray tracing, that type of thing. He's kind of come full circle, he says, and he does believe that ray tracing will be the end game for this eventually once we get the performance levels we need. He talks about Rage a little bit, no integrated benchmark mode quite yet, no support for Eyefinity or Tessellation and those types of things. There's a whole lot more in there, and in fact, it's a 35-minute interview. Our very own Tim Very did a transcription of this, and I think it was like 6,000 words or something like that. So you can.
He's awesome.
Yeah.
Watch.
It was funny. We saw some comments right on YouTube and on our site. Like, hey, we really need a transcription for this. So we got that, and he did that pretty quickly. So definitely go check out the review if you don't want to watch the whole video. I think it's worth watching just to hear him talk and to see the cleaning people go behind him. But
exactly,
it's really good. It's really good information.
Sorry,
go ahead.
I said I was there for the interview behind the cameras, and I still had to rewatch it because it's just dense. It's dense.
Yeah, I've done a Carmack interview transcription before. I know there's a lot of pausing, looking up words on Google, Wikipedia, those types of things. A couple of other things to get to, since we don't want to talk about that interview the whole time. Nvidia released their Q2 2012 results. Josh, you kind of wrote up a little post on this. Kind of boring, not a whole lot of interesting information here. Is there anything that we can maybe base an opinion on, kind of glean from it? Yeah. What do we got there?
Last year Nvidia had a bad year. Their revenues dropped pretty badly due to the Fermi architecture not coming out in a timely manner. And when it did come out, it was just the GTX 480 and GTX 470. Those were not widely picked up. They didn't really get the ball rolling until they got the GTX 460 and GTS 450 out, and some of these smaller geometry type chips. So this quarter they did significantly better than last year. Instead of having like $842 million in revenue, they had something like 1.017 billion. So that's a significant gain for them, because if you talk to your friend Sean Pelly and how happy he was with his stock options when he went in at $32 and suddenly they were at $5, that Nvidia had a pretty bad year last year. So they made about 150 some odd million in actual profit. They've seen some growth in some surprising areas. Notebooks, discrete graphics is still growing for them. They've got the Optimus technology that seems to be working very well for them and is very popular with OEMs and users alike. Their Quadro essentially rules the roost in terms of professional graphics cards. Yeah, AMD has the Fire Pro, but they only have like maybe 8 or 9% of the market share, and while Quadro and Nvidia is the rest. I think Matrox may have a small amount in there, but it's minimal at best. They're
Tegra?
No, Tesla. Sorry,
Tesla.
Tesla stuff. They essentially have 100% of that market. They've been very aggressive with CUDA, working with other software developers and companies, and since the G80 architecture, they've been able to do GPU just a little bit better. They have a better programming type space.
I mean, they're the only ones that really spent time and money on it, right? So it makes sense why they would be the dominant force there.
Yeah, and I mean they've been pushing this for years. AMD is really only just catching up, and still they've got a ways to go. The only place that AMD really beats them in is Bitcoin mining. But how many Fortune 500 companies have Bitcoin mining farms in their basements?
If they read our articles, hopefully none of them.
Well, yeah, no kidding. But anyway, I mean they essentially own 100% of that space. I mean there's no growth in there in terms of hey, we've got a higher percentage, because they essentially spend all the sell all the cards there. So those are areas that have stayed steady or grown. Desktop has dropped a little bit because AMD does have some pretty good products, and also Intel with Sandy Bridge has a pretty competent part in terms of graphics. So we've seen a little bit of a loss from there, but otherwise everything else is growing. Their Tegra is not quite off the ground yet. I mean, they made a big impression at CES. They've got some, pretty high-profile products out there, and really
a brilliant pricing scheme.
Pardon?
And a brilliant pricing scheme for that market segment. $25 or so. Pick up the Tegra 2.
Yeah, it's dirt cheap, but it's a really, really small chip anyway, so it's very easy to fab on TSMC's 40-nanometer process. What is kind of interesting there is that a lot of their big growth products are not coming out until this next quarter. Samsung has the Galaxy R, I believe, which looks like it's going to be a pretty hefty phone and going to be pretty popular. The Droid X2 hasn't been out all that long. That's Tegra-based. We're starting to see a whole lot more tablets using the Tegra 2. But again, when you're competing against Apple, and I mean they've got the Galaxy 10.1 just until recently was banned from being sold in Europe due to court order, and Apple photoshopping the Galaxy Tab 10.1 to say how close it looks to our iPad 2, but let's Photoshop the aspect a little bit so we can get it looking a little bit closer.
Oh well, I mean, but I think it's interesting how little growth there was in the Tegra market over this time span. I think, especially post-CES, we kind of thought that would rocket up, right? That we would see this immediate boost because they announced all these tablets and all these phones, and it's been a much slower process. And I think NVIDIA as a company is having to deal with that because they're not used to these slow development cycles, right? Even the notebook market in the PC world, which is the slowest part of that.
Well, and part of that is also, and part of that is also, you've got these companies that have these long-term relationships with Qualcomm, long-term relationships with TI, and they've got a software stack of that, all their products that are based around the graphical portion of those particular chips. And so getting in with the Tegra 2 has been a lot harder than they expected. They thought, hey, this is going to be a breakout product. We're going to get out these dual-core ARM9 based products with decent graphics, and they're just going to be eaten up. And it hasn't been the case. I mean, they've had to work really hard to get into where they are. Their embedded stuff is getting interesting. I mean, Audi I believe by next year is going to be 100% NVIDIA-based products in their infotainment systems in these cars, and so that's a big step for them. Other car companies will come knocking because, hey, we would like to compete, especially if Audi has a good product. It'd be awesome to see like Mercedes or Ford or GM come in and start doing this. But that's still kind of a stretch away because Audi, even though it's interesting and it has some neat cars, I mean, they're not exactly a market leader in terms of global sales. So they're paid out a lot more in R&D costs for Tegra 2 than they have received back. And they're really hoping that Kal-El, which is going to be released here probably in the next month and a half, is going to give them a little bit more of a boost up. It's going to be quad-core. It's going to have slightly better graphics, but it's going to be having the same kind of power characteristics as the older Tegra 2. And they say the reason for this is that, one, they know a little bit better how to build these chips on TSMC's 40-nanometer process.
Right.
They've also been a lot more aggressive with power gating and shutting down these cores quicker so that you're not wasting cycles with these cores just doing nothing. And so when you...
The quotes I was going to say, the quotes I saw on that were performance was going to be obviously much improved, but power consumption was actually lower than Tegra 2.
Yeah, it could very well be. I mean, we won't know this until we see, but you've also have to think about where Google's going and the people who make the applications for these phones, if they're really going to put a lot more code in there to support all 4 cores, or rather just stay with 1 or 2. And so this is another, kind of environmental thing that NVIDIA is going to have to address with their products. But overall, NVIDIA is still moving forward. They're not dying. They're still making money. People were expecting them to be, 1.5 billion around this time after some years ago, but things just didn't pan out for them as well as they have seen, but or hoped. But they're keeping along with Project Denver, and we'll see where they go. But for right now, they're still on solid footing.
We did have another review I will mention briefly here. Everybody should go check out Matthew Smith's review of the Acer Chromebook. We finally got one of those up, and he was a little, I don't want to say disappointed, but I think it's exactly what we expected. Here's an Atom-based netbook, essentially, that doesn't have a Windows operating system, so you're kind of limited in what you can do there. The idea of a cloud-based notebook is really good, but I think in the execution of it, he didn't really come away loving it. But if you're interested in the whole idea of the Chromebook and maybe even what the pricing and that kind of stuff is, definitely go check out his review and let us know what you think. So we've got a lot of news to cover. Before we do that, let's take a quick break here and thank today's podcast sponsor. All right, thank you, MSI, for that. We're going to talk about a story here that I find very humorous. This is Crysis 2. You remember last month, I guess it was, released a big patch for support of DirectX 11, high-quality textures, those types of things. Well, our friends over at the Tech Report did a little investigation. I'm guessing based on the tools they're using, with a little nudging from some friends at AMD, that they started to look at the performance aspects of Crysis 2 with Tessellation and DirectX 11 on, and the results are pretty funny. Jeremy, what did we learn about this development?
What did we learn about the enhanced bionic jersey barrier?
Yeah, that was weird.
That way, no, because it's supposedly a cover-based shooter, so it gives you something to stare at.
Right.
Well, you're hiding behind cover. Myself, I didn't actually pick the game up until very recently because, there's a high texture or a high quality texture package and DX11 support. All right, maybe this will actually be like Crysis and cripple my system. And well, it did hurt my AMD cards fairly nastily for a very good reason, as we find out. Myself, I played it through. I mostly just snuck up and knifed people. I didn't really see the point of the cover, so I think I might have missed some of the benefits of the bricks, which are rendered in beautiful detail. Just You would not believe how many polygons go into this.
If you go to the Tech Report store and you look, where they're talking about these concrete slabs that exist on,
and then there's
these jersey barriers.
And jersey barriers as well. But there's also got a shot where they're staring out of a window of a blown up building, and there's just off to the corner of your eye some bricks, which are on the side of the window, just lovingly rendered in.
So essentially, what they're doing is they're enabling tessellation, and they're like incredibly heavily tessellating these portions of the game that are like minute and almost not useful for anything. So you can see the screenshots they're showing on the video version here. One of those jersey barriers is tessellated, one of them is not. And I would tell you,
can tell because on one there's a little bit of a hook on the very top,
handle,
which is raised. So the handle actually has a bit of depth to it, whereas on the other one it's just a little flat decal.
Yeah. So I mean, this is not an important enough part of the game to need it, and it's.
But what about the water?
Well, see, the water, they do a good job of tessellating it, but what is interesting,
and they don't do anything for the distance.
Well,
right?
even worse than that.
As it is when you're just looking at water that's directly in front of you, that's carried out to the point where when they're looking at the actual texture frame, and I think it's 3D Studio Max or whatever they fired up to actually measure it,
right?
The counts are just as dense as it's disappearing off of the horizon.
Yep.
As it is right directly at your feet, even if there isn't any water.
Right, and even the screenshot we have on our site shows that for whatever reason, they render a layer of tessellated water under.
You gotta know what the water table's doing.
Solid ground. Like you're playing a level where there is no water. You're in a city, and there's still.
But the tessellated trees might die if there's no water.
So the debate that Tech Report raises with this is it lazy coding? Is it lazy development? Or is it something more underhanded than that, where Nvidia and Crytek got together and said, hey, we're really good at tessellation. If we just accidentally leave all this stuff on all the time, will that hurt AMD's performance to the effect that we get the advantages? So there's a screenshot of a tessellated jersey barrier. Does it look great? Yes. Is it overkill? 100%. Maybe 99%.
Like the infinite dots on the infinite texture that we were just discussing.
Those are all, I mean, everything you're looking at there is a triangle. I mean, that's tessellated geometry. Those aren't
hundreds of thousands of triangles for no real
purpose.
Reason.
So I could see a developer wanting to do this if it didn't have any effect on performance, right? But if you enable tessellation on AMD hardware, you get these big performance drops, and this is obviously why.
They essentially enabled tessellation, maximum tessellation within the program as opposed to the driver-limited AMD tessellation. AMD dropped by about 31 to 38% in performance.
That's a lot.
NVIDIA's somewhere around 17 to 21%.
Yeah, I mean, look, NVIDIA's card has better tessellation support. There's no doubt, right? And that's just the name of the game. AMD built a different type of engine than NVIDIA did for this generation of parts, and maybe they'll change it next time, maybe they won't. But AMD's argument has always been, look, we do really good at tessellation levels that matter to gamers, that actually improve image quality, not to this sub-pixel level triangle status or this abundance of tessellation on these types of barriers. So it's really interesting. Go check out the post that Jeremy made on that, and then go check out the whole story that Scott over at Tech Report did.
One thing they never did show was the character. I really would have loved to have seen the depth of tessellation on an actual enemy versus like an enemy hiding behind a jersey barrier, so we can compare the density just to see versus what matters versus what doesn't.
Right. Okay, we also have, we're going to bring in Alan into the discussion. Come on, Alan.
Hey, Alan.
Come on, Alan. So we have a lot of SSD news. I don't know if we have anything super major to discuss, but a lot of kind of small little bits, announcements, fixes perhaps to be released. I guess we'll start off with a couple of Samsung things. We got mobile SSDs and new consumer SSDs?
Okay, so this is major from the standpoint of Samsung is the largest SSD producer. So
is that news to us, or is that?
It's a friendly reminder because it's easy to forget, right? You just don't realize that Samsung is in the vast majority of the OEM stuff that exists.
Okay.
Just in general, right? And that's what last week's news was actually, which is PM830 series solid-state drives, which are coming out in they announced OEM form factor last week. And pretty much the same exact drive is being released consumer retail grade. That announcement was just just this morning, actually.
Okay.
So they're all the same, right? This is the OEM versus the retail package, snazzy packaging kind of deal. Okay. The retail package drive will be a little prettier. It'll have some orange accents on the top, just some little touches they do, that kind of thing. Also, the retail side is going to be available in 3 different SKUs. So one's just the drive, bare drive. The other ones are typical laptop upgrade kit that has the adapter, the USB to serial ATA adapter, and Norton Ghost is what they're including, so that you can ghost your drive over. Actually, even the retail package that's the bare drive also comes with Norton Ghost to help you just in case you need it for some reason. And then the third SKU is one that's the desktop class kit that has the extra serial ATA cable. I think it comes with the little serial ATA power from the Molex adapter cable as well, and it comes with the bracket.
Who still has a power supply? Doesn't have SATA.
I know who still has that. I don't know. I thought I saw that in the picture though. I could be wrong. But it also comes with that 3.5 inch to 2.5 inch adapter bracket, so you can actually hard mount it in your case in case you don't have a 2.5 inch. So all the typical things you'd see for those kinds of kits. This is very much in line with what Kingston. We've seen Kingston do that in the past with most of their drives. They almost always come in 3 SKUs. So that's good. It's good that they're catching up to that. As far as their previous generation from Samsung, that drive was really offered just as a drive. They didn't do any kind of special touches like this. The copy of Ghost that comes with this, I've been told, is
that
full
application
blown.
still exists.
Well,
yeah,
it still exists. It's a decent. Yeah, I mean, it works. But
Norton
what
isn't totally.
It's the only non-Satan spawn of Peter Norton.
Yeah, really, seriously.
What I do like about it is it's the full retail package. It's got the regular key. It's not just an evaluation that is only for cloning an image over. They give you the full blown thing, so you can use it for backups and whatever later on, that kind of deal. So that's pretty good. Now, as far as the drive goes, okay, so this is same type of controller, refresh to the point of increased throughput, increase interface speed. I couldn't weasel out of them if we're going to see an increase in IOs per second, increase in the random access type performance.
But it's
I would
dual
imagine
core ARM, man. Dual core ARM.
it's a triple core, I was told.
No.
It's
3 arms.
a triple
That's
ARM
rude,
9.
isn't it?
It's supposed to be that, and I was told it was the same deal in the last generation as well, which I did not know, which is weird. Because the previous generation, these kind of drives have always been, I sort of call it's like tortoise and the hare thing, right? You get a SandForce drive, it burns through everything real fast, but then if you write a bunch of uncompressible data to it, and then things start to slow down. Whereas these, they sort of take like the middle ground approach on their performance, but they will stay that way. That's the advantage, right? They'll, your performance is lower, but if you really beat the drive up and do a bunch of random writes to it and a bunch of all the other any kind of other things to it, it's still going to be the same performance, right? It's really consistent, and I think that's part of the reason that the OEMs tend to go for them, because they don't want they want to spec out their their whatever their device is that's going to include this drive. They want to spec it for X performance rating, and they want it to stay that way. So that's cool. They also added.
Are you sure it's triple core? Because I'm reading here that it's the Samsung Hummingbird, which is dual core 1 gigahertz ARM.
You may very well be right. I'm just going with what they told me the other day.
Well, never mind.
On a phone call. I don't know.
Nothing.
Well, no, we're gonna get
We'll
we're gonna get actual hard data on this, as far as what to include with an article when they get closer to actual release. They're gonna sample them. We'll take a look at it. We'll review it just like any other drive. So we'll answer that question probably around October-ish, I would imagine.
Sweet.
Okay, so that's the Samsung stuff, which is good.
Hey, can I interject one thing in here, since we like to talk? How would you compare and contrast Samsung-based controller SSDs with return rates that you have heard of and issues with, as compared to the latest SATA 6G releases from OCZ, SandForce-based, Intel? They're using the Marvell and their own controllers.
Yeah.
How's Samsung as compared to the rest?
I have come to a sort of a startling realization with the whole return rate on the serial ATA 6 gigabit thing. First, I can't speak to Samsung because they don't have a part that we can actually test that goes that fast yet. And so that means that we're not going to, I can't tell you anything about return rates on them because they're just not out there. However, the SandForce 6 gigabit controller, and this covers any, OCZ, Agility, Vertex, the 3 series of those, any other companies, Drive, Corsair, anybody else making these things. There's this weird blue screen of death thing, right? That was actually one of the things we were going to talk about. Nantech wrote something up where he sort of had one of his test beds doing it. I haven't been able to get any of my samples to do this, but we've read, that there's failure rates, there's return rates, that sort of thing.
Well, we're not doubting your ability to kill an SSD.
Right, I know.
You've proven that talent.
I have fried Fusion IO drives and stuff like that. I still can't, I can't personally get one of these to break. So I can't tell if it's just the flash itself. There might be cheaper binning on the flash, that sort of thing. But the realization I've come to is the SandForce, the 2281 series SandForce, which is the serial ATA 6 gigabit one, that's the only one that we've tested that actually pushes the bus to full saturation, which might have something to do with, just think about anytime you test RAM, a CPU, anything like that, anything that's really pushing the envelope on a given interface, that's when you run into those funky incompatibility / crash the system problems, right? Like anytime you're trying to push RAM to its max spec and the system, some motherboard just doesn't like it, this happens, right? Okay. This could be that sort of a thing. I don't know. So like even going off of what Anand was seeing, he changed his power supply and the system stopped doing it. I can't even think of what would make that connection happen, right? You're changing what? Changing a voltage by a fraction of a volt, which is the worst that could happen from changing a power supply. Somehow that fixed it. So this is a very quirky, touchy, kind of weird thing that some people are seeing that seems very dependent on what your combination of hardware is. That's really all we can say on it. And along those lines of touchy-feely combination of hardware type of issues, Intel just hours ago, pushed out the firmware fix for their that 8 megabyte funky 320 series bug that we saw. So it was actually just 2-3 days ago they said, we're final validation testing, we'll have something in a couple weeks, and then just a couple days later they turned it around and went, yep, it's good, here you go. So that's good on them. So anybody with a 320 series Intel solid-state drive should, first, it's not a destructive update, but you should still back your drive up before you do this.
You know how they test the firmware?
I'm going to qualify that. How do they test the firmware?
They have an infinite supply of monkeys installing an infinite supply of SSDs with this new firmware.
Well, if they don't get stuck on a local plateau, it'll work.
Yeah.
Yes. So if you have one of these, back it up.
Always.
You should have already been backing it up because there's that funky issue that did exist where, the drive might go into you're not getting your stuff back mode if you kill power in a weird way, right? That's a bad mode to be in, especially since this firmware, I don't think this firmware just brings it back from the dead and gives you your data back. I haven't tested this because I haven't been able to get the 320 that we have to fail this way. It might not, I don't know. But you should be backing your stuff up anyway. And firmware's out now. You should do this, update it, so you're not inconvenienced by a subsequent, your power goes out in some weird way and then the drive gets stuck in this mode. So yes, avoid that. Very good for you.
Okay.
What else we got?
That was actually, I think that's it because we covered the Anantech thing too. But I just want to say that Intel, at first we thought they maybe weren't reacting quickly enough to the potential error, but they definitely made up for it. And they got the fix out earlier than they said they could. I guess we were going to talk about a story where Intel's releasing the firmware for the bug fix in 2 weeks. And that was only, 5-6 days ago or something, I guess, right? So
something like that, yeah.
Commendable for them to actually addressing the issue, right? They do a good job there. So it kind of might be, people still have this debate about which SSD are you going to buy if you're kind of focused on reliability, Intel, SandForce, OCZ, all those different options. So we are continually monitoring that status. Something else happened today.
Welcome to the cutting edge of technology.
Yeah,
where you bleed.
AMD announced the first triple-core Llano-based processors This is the what do we got? The A6 3500 APU. Anything interesting about this other than it's triple core, slightly lower clock speed?
65 watts, 2.1 gigahertz, and it has turbo mode up to 2.4. Even though these are the new 32 nanometer processors, GlobalFoundries is still dealing with a brand new process node, and these are brand new products. So it's not surprising to see that these lower clocked, and in fact, one core, as Scott Wasson said, was tragically removed in a terrible tree trimming accident. They're still struggling with a very new technology. They've only been shipping these things for a couple of months. The GlobalFoundries had some problems ramping up production of their 32 nanometer SOI process. So yeah, we're going to see some of these releases, and it's not going to be for a couple more months when we start seeing some speed upgrades, and it's going to be very interesting to see what Bulldozer does when it's coming down the pipe. But one thing to also consider is part of the problem with the TDPs is that they're doing the slower type transistors. I know that sounds really, really terribly uneducated. But basically, the GPU portion runs significantly slower than the CPU, and I think that is a significant portion of the TDP goes into the graphics part. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with 32 nanometer Bulldozer here in the next few months.
And still under $100.
Yeah, that's true. The pricing is a big deal there. It seems like every week we're talking about the Intel Ultrabook, not necessarily in good news all the time, but last week we talked about the $300 million fund that Intel created for it. The week before that we talked about the disagreement that Intel had with its partners over how much it actually costs to build an Ultrabook. Jeremy, what did we get this week? Intel Ultrabooks at Ultrabook manufacturers' request. What were they asking for? Was
yeah,
it lower
they
prices?
were looking like they were making a pitch, and they just sort of stopped halfway through it. Intel has been running into a problem where all of a sudden the major manufacturers that were going to be putting out the Ultrabooks were coming up with a bill of materials of about $1,000. Now they need to make money off of this, and so does the guy that distributes them and sells them, so on and so on. So they need to be cheaper than Apple. Essentially, that's where this Ultrabook is being aimed for. The ultra thin, they're either 18 millimeter, or they're 21 millimeter. So you're talking MacBook Air area. If it's $1,000 just to build it, it's not going to happen.
Right.
So Intel comes back saying, well, we don't understand. The way we think it's going to be about $500 to $700 for the smaller ones. The larger one somewhere between $475 and $650, with no real explanation where exactly the guys making the notebook got their edition wrong. So Intel then tossed out, as we talked about last week, there's $300 million worth of funding they're willing to give to anyone who will further technologies which will be used in Ultrabooks. Mm-hmm. So, okay, R&D is being, subsidized for a little bit. This isn't going to help sales. $300 million for that market segment is pennies. It's somebody offering you 50 cents against your next beer. That's going to help a lot. So now we heard earlier this week that essentially all of the major manufacturers turned to Intel and said, look, if you cut the price of the processors, which we're looking at about being between $250 to $317 by 50%. So you cut it by 50%, all of a sudden we're going to make money, we're happy, we will sell these things, it's just wonderful, everything's great. Intel said, no, not going to happen. We'll think about giving you about 20% off or so. But again, this really isn't going to defray the costs if the manufacturers are right, and chances are, being the manufacturers, they are going to be on the right side. So all of a sudden, it looks like the Ultrabook is almost...
Is it in trouble again?
Well, it's, as we've been saying all along, it's dead at birth. It's like the UMPC. Great idea, poor execution. Yeah. And as I mentioned earlier, the other problem is that with Ivy Bridge coming up, You've got the new Atom series coming. And the Atom series, what they're looking at Oak Trail, should be priced about $95, which is almost half of what you're going to pay for a tablet, just for the bloody processor.
Right.
So even if they were to give a 50% discount, even if for whatever reason Intel could be talked into a 70 to 90% discount against Tegra 2, which is about $20 a chip, and hey, chipset's pretty much thrown in for free.
Yeah.
You know, how are they going to compete? Intel hasn't quite figured out. They've got the top end of the market. They're used to muscling. They're used to sort of saying, we're the player. If you want to play, you have to deal with us. And part of Nvidia's income is Intel paying off them for
a little bit, for a couple more quarters.
Saying that when they shouldn't have. But so now you've got them, you know, trying to sneak into this marketplace, trying to be the big bully, trying to be, you know, more powerful and more able to do everything in a market segment where you got to be cheap, you got to be able to do just enough, just in time, and that's all people want. Well, so I don't know. I don't think we're going to see
I know a lot of people are still hoping that this segment actually comes out, is released, is updated, and is going to be in that sub $1,000 field. So
I hope so. I don't see it coming.
Well, let's move on to the exciting world of processor coolers now and talk about why Sandy Bridge E, the enthusiast extreme edition of Sandy Bridge that's going to come out later this year probably, is going to ship without a cooler, and why AMD's FX processors, Bulldozer, will maybe ship with a liquid cooling option. So this was a story from VR Zone talking about Sandy Bridge E processors. Sandy Bridge E 3820, 3930, 3960X, all those numbers mean nothing to us. The processors are supposedly rated at 130 watt TDP. However, VR Zone reports that the processors may in fact be drawing as much as 180 watts at stock speeds. That's huge. Josh, what is the highest? What are we at? 130 is kind of the maximum we've seen.
125 watt TDP, and for a while there, AMD with their X4 965, and also the previous generation of the 9800 or 9900 Phenom. Those were 140 watt TDPs.
So, and when we were making fun of Tegra, how much was that? That was only about 160 TDP. Was
it's half a watt to 1 watt TDP for Tegra 2.
Yeah.
I mean, 180 watts seems kind of ridiculous. So this is going to be the new socket 2011, quad channel memory controller. I don't know exactly if we're talking 8 cores on these processors. Is that what the rumors are circulating around? So this is a high end part. This is an enthusiast part, and I guess the reason they wouldn't ship it with a cooler is because it's going to be really expensive, and they don't want to do that. So enthusiast level parts, enthusiasts are used to buying their own aftermarket cooling. I guess it's kind of okay, right? But then we compared this with what AMD is kind of rumored to be doing with Bulldozer and their FX series of processors that are also coming out later this year, that they might be shipping those with sealed loop water coolers, similar to the Corsair H60, the H100, the Acer, the Thermal Takes, all the other kind of self-contained water cooling kits that exist today. And I don't think we're going to see anywhere near 180 watt TDPs on these processors. What do we think? Is this more of a kind of trying to get the enthusiast back into the AMD market, right? The AMD was very excited about the FX brand. I think the FX brand means diddly when it's released. I don't think people are going to have this affection towards the AMD FX brand at all. So if they were to include an LCS, one of these liquid cooling systems, is that going to add too much cost to the processor, or do you think that'll bring in enthusiasts, DIYers who are like, well, okay, here's a little added value, maybe for $40 more, $50 more, I'm getting this kind of self-contained water cooling kit that I could take with me and use for multiple systems?
Yeah, I think they're going to have multiple SKUs for each speed grade. And obviously the high end will be the Bulldozer plus the liquid cooling, and likely you'll get $10 or $15 off the overall cost as if you bought the processor by itself, and then got the liquid cooling from Antec. So you're going to see a little bit of an advantage there, and that might be a pretty good selling point because a lot of people really like these coolers. They're pretty effective, they're efficient, they're quiet. And, not having a turbine engine running in the middle of your case is a positive thing for most of us.
I've got a side note on the Intel side.
What's that?
Say that again, Alan.
I got a side note on the Intel side on that.
Okay.
This is not the first time they've decided to drop their heatsink coming in the box, in the retail box for a CPU. They actually did it with the Xeon, starting with the 5500 series Xeons, because for that situation, they ended up where like half of their people were not using the heatsink that came with it because they were trying to install it in, say, like a 1U rack, and they had to buy the separate heatsink anyway because the one that came with it was too big. Probably the same kind of thing, right? I mean, this is an enthusiast thing. Who the heck's going to use the stock Intel heatsink on it? The top end or the really high end enthusiast part.
Yeah, you're right. The Intel heatsinks have kind of been pretty cruddy. I mean, they work, but the performance difference between them and even a modestly priced aftermarket cooler is pretty dramatic. On the AMD side, that's not necessarily been the case. AMD seem to have had a little bit better retail cooler selection, I guess.
Yep.
I don't know. It's interesting. Another note, we've talked a lot about Bitcoin mining over the last couple of months, and this was interesting. Alan, tell us a little bit about the Bitcoin Trojan and why people. I don't know. This is basically a Trojan that gets on your machine and uses your GPU to mine Bitcoins for the author of said program.
Basically, it was just a matter of time before this happened.
Yeah.
Something comes out, especially something that's a money-making type of thing that uses computers, and then you just take every given person out there that realizes they can make some money off of this, and the more computers they had, the better.
Yep.
Botnet people or malware people, right? Those kind of people. And then you have Trojan.badminer, which comes out. And it's basically a piece of malware that does the same thing that all the Bitcoin mining tools do, except it does it behind your back. And, it gets on your system by whatever the exploit, the actor, whoever that guy is, bad guy that's trying to get some stuff on your system and make some money for himself. He gets it on there, and your computer just does the Bitcoin thing without you knowing, and increases your electric bill, just like our article pointed out, by the way. Which actually so this changes the dynamic for the incentive for catching a person running this type of a botnet, by the way, because this is costing people calculable amounts of money.
Yes.
Right. This is a direct relation to electric bill issue. This is not you just clean up the system because it's sending out some bad emails or something to people, right? Which is what your typical botnet does.
Right.
Yeah. But also on the flip side, pretty easy to tell when you're actually infected with this, because if your system starts sounding like a hairdryer, probably got it.
But at least, as compared to sending emails, you're actually using that GPU.
True.
Constructively for somebody.
I bet there'd be. I mean, I could totally see tons of people just not knowing that their GPUs are being utilized for that, or reinstalling drivers and trying to figure out what bug in the AMD Catalyst Control Center is keeping the fan running at 100% throughout the night. That's
the thing that I wonder is, it installs the two legitimate Bitcoin clients, the GPU one or the CPU one.
Yeah.
And essentially just preloaded with his account information. So what I haven't seen, and I did a quick look, I didn't say anything on the forums, is if you're already running Bitcoin, if that will actually prevent the Trojan, once it sneaks in and tries to grab install privileges, from
maybe
installing itself on top of it, because you're already immune since you're already doing it.
That's a pretty low number of people, don't you think? I mean,
you and Ken, anyways.
Yeah, that's true. All right, let's move on to hardware software picks of the week before we round out this episode of the PC Perspective podcast. I am going to select something that I think anybody that travels a lot should use. It's something that Ken actually told me about several months ago and has become one of my favorite applications and websites, Tripit.com. If you don't know what it is, you go there, you create an account, and it organizes all of your travel documents for you in one place. You can access it through the website, but obviously they have iPhone and Android applications. I think they have a BlackBerry app too. But what's really cool about it is that you don't have to manually go input all the information. So you sign up for an account, and I book a flight to come out here for the studio tour. I booked a hotel, and I booked a rental car all separately. Well, when I booked the hotel a couple of months ago, or when I booked the flight a couple months ago, I just, you get that confirmation email. I forwarded it on to plans@tripit.com, and Tripit already knows what my email address is. It knows what to do, whose account to associate with that email address. So it automatically creates an itinerary for me based on that information. When I forwarded it a hotel information a couple of weeks later, it knew that it was associated with that trip, overlapped in the same days with my account, automatically put all that in there. Car rental, same thing. And even does, it does pretty cool things like, well, it saw that I had arrival in SFO, hotel in downtown San Francisco, car rental. Here are directions. It actually, already has directions in your kind of schedule here of how to get from SFO to your hotel. And it does really cool things like that. You can set up reminders. It keeps track of how many miles you're traveling. If you travel a lot, you think that's some kind of statistic that you'll want to look back on. And if you've got lots of trips, like I have 3 or 4 different flights in the next, 6 weeks or something stupid like that planned up, you just, every time you get an email that's about your itinerary, you just forward it to this account and it gathers all that information. It could be meetings, it could be, like I said, your itineraries for your flight or hotel or car, anything like that, and it organizes it and it keeps it all, takes into account your time zones and all kinds of things. So if you've never tried it and you travel even modestly frequently, give it a shot. It's completely free as well. There's an upgraded version, but doesn't have anything that I'm really interested in. So tripit.com if you haven't seen that yet. I might have been late to the game. So, Jeremy, what do you got?
Do you know what's really sad?
Oh, what? Go ahead.
I travel so infrequently that only this travel to QuakeCon was the first time that I saw that they had these cell phone scanners. They had the barcode on there for their ticket. They scan it. I'm like, what kind of witchcraft is this? I'm going back to my paper ticket. And you guys can just...
The worst part about it is not every airport accepts it. And so I could get that electronic ticket on my phone and go to San Francisco Airport, which is, stuck back in the 70s, and they don't have the ability to support it. So then you don't know that until you get up to security. Then you got to go back and get a paper ticket. So I still print out a paper ticket.
But they all support the paper ticket.
I know. Jeremy, what do you got for us this week?
I ran into something this week from a strange company called Exit Data, which apparently is only available in the UK so far. But it's a handy little USB keychain fob, which is an anti-keylogger. Anti-keylogger. Yeah, it's an anti-keylogger.
Okay.
So it's got this...
As compared to like an Uncle-y keylogger.
Which, and when your uncle starts logging your keys...
then you're in bad shape.
Oh, yeah. So, essentially what it does is just a little fob, and... Why is Chrome behaving so much differently? That's bizarre. But it runs a little chip which encrypts the USB signal between your keyboard or your mouse and your PC. And you can either reboot the machine or you can just turn the app that installs with this on and off, and it completely resets the security key. So you don't really have to actually worry about being infected by a keylogger, in that, as far as it's concerned, it's getting scrambled data.
Interesting.
So it's an interesting idea, and it's about $50 euro plus shipping, since it is only available.
Okay.
But
this is only for the most paranoid people, by the way.
Well, over the past week or so, there's been a lot of stuff that we've put up on the front page that sort of might inspire paranoia. And not just because of Bitcoining. So I don't know. It might make you feel a little bit better.
All right. Josh, do you have any memory for us this week?
No memory, but something almost as good. Say your parents or your girlfriend or somebody who does a decent amount of whatever on their computer.
Okay.
You can pick up a AMD A3850, or also known as the 3850 Llano processor. It's the highest end, 2.9 gigahertz, the full graphics. But the best part about it is you get Dirt 3 free with the processor. So you save $49 or $39, whatever it's at now.
$139 on Newegg.
Yeah,
for the processor.
And the program is $39 usually. So,
it's one of those things. If you're going to buy it anyway,
yeah,
there you go. All right, Alan, last on our list.
So,
yeah,
I ran across this. It was kind of comical. I've never really liked McAfee. unless I wanted to slow my computer down to almost nothing. But so they came out with this app for the iPhone, which I did not get, but I just thought it was worth a mention for other people to not get it.
Okay.
If you have a lot of money to burn and you're that kind of person that might accidentally get this, don't do it. It's pretty silly. So there's this Wave Secure software that McAfee makes. It's supposed to put it on your smartphone, and it does spiffy things like be able to wipe your contacts or back up your contacts or that kind of thing. Right. iPhones already do this stuff. So,
this is pretty much McAfee and Norton's MO, correct?
Yeah. I mean, I can see them doing it for the other devices, but why are you going to make a $20 app for a device that already has the stuff?
The answer is profit.
Well, yes, but I would encourage people to, use most of those features now that you already have, and then if you, want that one extra feature that's not implemented yet, like the whole backup to the cloud thing.
Yep.
That's coming with iOS 5 pretty soon. So just give it a month or two. Don't blow $20 on something. Just sync it to your PC for now.
Seems like
I don't know.
reasonable.
Yeah, you can go down to the corner, $20, and get. Never mind.
Not only that, but that's pretty steep. $20 for an app that does
Several
backup,
months worth,
restore, and wipe. I don't know. Yeah, and the article was pretty cute. That got up on Daily Tech because they right below the picture of the screenshot of the app, they have a screenshot of snake oil. So it was nice.
All right, that is going to wrap up this week's episode of PC Perspective. If you want to send us an email, I know we didn't get to any this week, but we are definitely still reading them and sorting them. podcast@pcper.com is the email address for that. Toll-free telephone number, leave us a voicemail, 1-888-38-PC-PER. That's toll-free in the U.S. and Canada. Please share this podcast with all of your friends and family. pcper.com/podcast. And again, twitter.com/pcper is back up and running, so you can get all of the news bits from Josh, Alan, Jeremy, myself, Scott, Tim, Matthew, anybody else.
And we're on Google Plus too.
And we're on Google Plus. But again, I don't have the short URL for you. Look for all of our names, I guess, is what I'll tell you. So with that, we will see you guys next week. I'm Ryan Shrout.
I'm Jeremy Hellstrom.
I'm Josh Walrath.
And I'm Al Malventano.
Thanks for listening.